Welcome to our event tonight. We wanted to share with all our supporters and members out there a look back at the work that was done in the 2020 election cycle, how that shaped what our current political landscape looks like, and then talk about what that means for the environmental opportunities in 2021 and beyond. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Hosdovich, and in addition to being your tour guide, so to speak, tonight, I'm also the Pennsylvania Campaigns Director for Clean Water Action. So I'm our point person on statewide issues, election issues. I also oversee our crew in the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia office and the support they provide for our election and state work, but also the excellent work that they're doing locally as well. And just to give a shout out to those folks, we do have Maurice Sampson with us tonight, who's our Eastern Pennsylvania Director, Joy Braunstein, who's our Western Pennsylvania Policy and Development Director, Quinita Kendrick, who is in our Philadelphia office and is our Lead Awareness Program Manager and Environmental Justice Organizer. Moses Nelson will hopefully be joining us. He's in our Pittsburgh office and is our Western Pennsylvania Community Engagement Director. Karam Gautam, who is not able to make it tonight because he's actually physically doing work at this moment in time, is our Phone Canvas Director and oversees all the folks who may be giving you calls looking to renew your membership pledge. He's out of our Pittsburgh office, as is Zach Strader, who is our Pittsburgh Field Canvas Director when we used to be in a non-pandemic time and could actually go door to door talking with residents about the environmental issues that we're working on. And Ian Lauda, who is our Philadelphia Field Director, is also not with us tonight. And it would be forsaken if I didn't jump back to the top of the pecking order and acknowledge our State Director, Myron Arnowit, who is not able to join us tonight, but is obviously a valuable part of making our operation run here in Pennsylvania. So we gather tonight, right, with some excitement and optimism. We're on the heels of an inauguration of Joe Biden as our new president. Certainly, as we were chatting before we started, it's a bit of a breath of fresh air, I think, for all of us. In addition to that, we also just swore in 3 new United States senators yesterday, tipping the balance to the Democrats. So we now have Democrats in control of the United States House of Representatives, the United States Senate, and the White House, which opens up a new level of possibilities for us at the federal level. I wish I could be as optimistic about the makeup of our state legislature and our state government, but the reality is we'll see that's maintained some level of status quo, which brings about sort of different challenges there. But I think regardless of whether we're operating at the state or federal level, there's going to be challenges. And I was reminded in a tweet this morning from a friend that I saw that regardless of what the dynamics are, we're now in the mode of holding our elected officials accountable, whether they be our friends or whether they be people who hold different positions on us. And that means we still need to organize. But before we can talk about where we are and going, let's take a look at where we were. So Clean Water Action is extremely active in elections at federal, state, and local levels. I'm so proud of the work that our team did in 2020 that I just wanted to share some of those efforts, which I think played a huge role in helping shape the results. We had 50 canvassers / volunteers participating in this past general election cycle that resulted in an attempt to reach 2,320,000 voters. Now, we didn't physically talk to all those individuals, as you'll see. And we went about trying to reach out to folks in a couple of ways, especially given the pandemic. Our door-to-door canvass, which is usually such a huge part of our operation, was taken away from us. So we spent a lot more time on the phones, making phone calls out to registered voters. We also brought for the first time into our efforts text messaging, which I think was a very unique tool for us to utilize, utilizing a system called Through Talk and Through Text to do both of these. And so our phone calls were not pick up and hang up, as some may know, but using a predictive dialer system in order to maximize the number of people we physically talk to. And the text system allowed us to text people and hold conversations. And I got to say, I was pleasantly surprised how many individuals were really interested in engaging around who they were voting for and why through text messaging. Just shows you the power of that form of communication in this day and age. And so of that 2 million, we physically had conversations with somewhere around 85,000 voters, collected a total of 12,000 IDs for specific candidates that we were working on, endorsed candidates at both the federal and state levels. And also, as part of our effort this year, there was a huge focus on getting people educated and signed up for vote by mail. And we were able to get 16,000 voters registered for vote by mail and educate them on the best ways in which to return those vote by mail in ballots. Our outreach to targets was somewhat broad. It certainly started with the 80,000 statewide members that we had, and we focused both on broadcasting 80,000 wide, but also on specific down ballot races and key state legislative or congressional districts where we thought that there was a real chance to flip a seat or to preserve a champion there. We also work with America Votes, and for folks who aren't familiar with that, that is a statewide table comprised of more progressive-minded organizations. That's environmental, faith-based, community-based. There's some labor folks at the table. And there is an actual America Votes staff who helps coordinate all these efforts to ensure that resources are more equitably distributed across the state and in certain races, so that not all of us are using our resources in one specific area. And they also do just a phenomenal job of figuring out who are those voters in Pennsylvania that we really need to reach out to if we're going to turn a particular election or race in a given way. Those voters who are infrequent or tend to identify as more purple than red or blue. And so they're a valuable resource, I think, to all who are partners with them. And certainly our Get Out the Vote effort focused first on those individuals that we were able to ID as Biden supporters. And then we also tried to broaden our reach and work on people that we couldn't ID, knowing that we needed to raise the level of turnout in this election. And so we went to newly registered Democrats and Democrats who voted in either 2016 or 2018, but not both, feeling like these are individuals who, if we could get them to the polls, would be supporters for Joe Biden and some of our down ballot ticket. We also use social media to raise awareness of the candidates we are endorsing. Our Twitter account has 2,994 followers, perhaps more since I created this slide back in December. You can see the number of people who are following us on Facebook. Certainly, if you utilize any of these social media platforms and you're not liking us or following us, it'd be great if you did, to keep up on what we're doing and what's happening. And the piece over on the left there for Sarah Inamorata, one of our endorsed candidates, is just an example of how we utilized these platforms to promote our endorsed candidates. And so what does that sort of all start to begin to translate into? Well, preliminary turnout analysis for 2020, 75.7% turnout. I believe Secretary of State Bukvar confirmed that this is the largest turnout we've had in Pennsylvania in quite some time. And you can sort of, hopefully, if you're not quite as colorblind as myself, you can sort of see the different shades here on the map of Pennsylvania to indicate where the areas of heavy turnout were. And certainly, I would say in the east there, that Bucks, Montco, Chester area, if folks are able to see my cursor in this area here, played such a big role. We're talking about the high 70% turnout in that area to bolster some of the other areas where we usually do see traditionally good turnout, like Allegheny County and Philadelphia. And certainly the center part of the state too, where you see this dark purple, was also really big. And now you might say, well, you know, that's probably Trump country, right? And in some cases that certainly helped propel him to win Pennsylvania in 2016. But what we had in 2020 that we did in 2016 were much more competitive down ballot races here. We had a really strong candidate in Eugene D. Pasquale, our former Auditor General, who is running for the United States Congress, George Scott, who had good name recognition, having previously run for Congress in this area, running for state Senate. So we had a lot of competitive races that were turnout in general, but we're also bringing out perhaps the Democrats and supporters for Joe Biden that weren't there for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Our next map here shows the turnout increase comparison between 2020 and 2016, which is a rise of almost 6% turnout differential. Again, sort of the light peachish or tannish areas you can see here. This is certainly one of those areas that I was just talking about of competitive down ballot races. Again, this sort of pinkish area shows that we saw a bigger increase in the Bucks, Montco, Chester area in terms of turnout than we did in 2016. And again, I think all of that is stuff that's fueling certainly the statewide success we had for Joe Biden. I should say too, I'm happy to share these slides with folks afterwards if it helps you to see these graphs again and you find some of this information interesting. We can get that out to folks. Again, vote by mail was so huge for Pennsylvania. First time ever done it as a no excuse mail-in vote. And you can see that. I mean, you could see that on election night, right? That part of the reason it took Pennsylvania to be called so long was because we had such a huge amount of mail-in ballots. Total requested, little over 3 million. Total returned, 2.6 million. It was a rate of 84, almost 85%. You can see on this graph here, the light blue is the well, maybe it's better to, the dark blue is the percentage of Democrats who used vote by mail. So almost half of the Democrats used it. You can see how much littler it was used by Republicans, only 18%. And that's why there was such a huge push for Donald Trump in terms of results on election night itself. They were all voting predominantly at the polls, 78% of them. voting at the polls. So their numbers were coming in more traditionally like we're used to. Democrats' numbers were more evenly split around vote by mail, and so we had to wait. And even independents were requesting vote by mail 23% at a greater rate than Republicans were in this past election cycle. And so vote by mail was so instrumental. I was so glad of our role in encouraging people to utilize vote by mail as a safe way to cast their ballot and participate in our democracy, especially given dealing with a pandemic and concerns of voter intimidation that may have been occurring in areas. So we saw the turnout, we saw our work, we saw vote by mail. So what does that actually look like now in terms of results? So here's our overall numbers graph-wise. Presidential, Pennsylvania went from having a GOP or Republican president to now a Democratic president. Our United States congressional delegation remains split at 9-9. Our state Senate saw very minimal change. Really, actually, it pretty much stayed static. We did lose some seats, but gained some seats elsewhere. And then our state house is where we saw a little bit of a drop off, again, losing 3 seats there. The numbers, you'll notice, don't add up to 50 state senators and 203 state house members because unfortunately we did have 2 officials between election day and now. So we have Arnold and Representative Mike Reese in the House. So there's an open seat there. It's unlikely that those seats are going to end up in Democratic, probably looking at a 21-28-1 split in the election results for Joe Biden, 50.6%, coding 4. Allegheny County is sort of the lone blue island here in western Pennsylvania. And then again, as we talked about earlier, in the east here, Philadelphia, dark blue, no surprise there. But getting these collar counties, the Delaware, Chester, Montco, Bucks, to move away from the reddish color and to be more whitish, lightish blue is really what is carrying us in the state. And I would be remiss to say Erie too, over here in the western part of the state, again becoming closer to white, very, 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 very light blue was important. That was a big means of helping Donald Trump win in 2016. We've got a little bit of a comparison map here. I know the numbers are probably a little small, but seeing what the map looked like for Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she got 49.6 and where it changed in 2020. And like I said, the numbers are probably a little bit small, so maybe you want to wait for the sharing of the slides in order to take a better look at this. But again, you can sort of see the blue areas again in these collar counties, the blue up here, even in Butler County, you sort of had a little bit of a swing, and that for what non-Western Pennsylvania folks is really a pretty staunch conservative area. So Joe Biden was able to pull out just a little bit more than what Hillary Clinton was in order to get where we were at. In terms of our personal work, we returned 7 incumbent congressional champions for the environment back to the United States Congress. We endorsed all of these candidates, did varying levels of work for them. Think they're all pretty critical to continuing to have a strong representation for the environment in Pennsylvania, in Washington, D.C. In Harrisburg, we returned a handful of incumbents who have been strong environmental champions for us. Sarah Namarato, Dan Miller out here in Western Pennsylvania, Danielle Friotten, Christine Howard, and Joe Hohenstein, all freshman legislators running for re-election for the first time out in southwestern Pennsylvania. Also in eastern Pennsylvania, Greg Vitale, who has been a long stalwart for us and maybe the environmental voice in the legislature, really critical to return him to Harrisburg as well. And then we elevated Carolyn Comita from her position in the state house to taking over a open state Senate district, which is great. I will point out that by helping Greg Vitale, by helping Carolyn Comita get reelected or ascend, you're talking about the two individuals who are now in charge of the House and Senate Environmental Resource and Energy Committees. So you can already, without having further gone into this year, you can already see the impact that getting those folks back is. They're in key positions on key committees. We also brought new voices to the table as well, not necessarily flipping some seats, but certainly changing some more middle of the road, more conservative Democratic voices and replacing them with younger, but also more progressive voices. Diane Herron, who's been a great champion for single-use plastics issues as Westchester mayor. We were able to help her replace Carolyn Comita in the state house. Nancy Gunst also in eastern Pennsylvania, and then over here in western Pennsylvania, Nick Pisciatano and Jessica Benham. I will also point out that in terms of what the legislature looks like, one of the seats that was lost during the election cycle was Frank Dermody in western Pennsylvania, who had been the House Minority Leader for a long time. And so his loss, while unfortunate in terms of our numbers, has opened up an opportunity for new leadership inside the House. And that's resulted in Joanne McClinton in the Philadelphia area becoming the new minority leader, first African-American female minority leader, I also believe. So we're making some history out here too, and we've got some fresh voices, both in seats, but also in positions of power. I will also point out that Jay Costa from Western Pennsylvania was reelected as the Senate minority leader. On the opposite side of things, Jake Corman is the president pro temp of the Senate. The Republicans have a new majority leader in the Senate, Kim Ward, who is a senator from one of the rural counties here in western Pennsylvania. On the House side, the Speaker of the House is Brian Cutler, who was Speaker of the House halfway through last year when Mike Turzai resigned. So that sort of makes up your leadership. I mentioned Greg Vitale was the House Chair for Environmental Resource and Energy. Unfortunately, his counterpart as Majority Chair is Daryl Metcalf, who is a very staunch ultra-conservative from out here in western Pennsylvania, who was chair last cycle as well. And then in the Senate side, opposite Carolyn Comita is Senator Gene Yaw, who has been the majority chair for Senate Environmental Resource Energy for quite some time. So given the makeup, let's start diving a little bit into what we can expect. Now, I will say this is not going to cover every possibility in the world. I think I tried to provide as much insight as possible. There's almost assuredly things that I've missed, but also things that are going to come up that I could not foresee. So I tried to be a little bit of both soothsayer, but also recognizing where some movement's already happening. So in Harrisburg, oil and gas is gonna continue to be a big issue. There were two pieces of legislation, both offered by Representative Sarah Innamorato, who you may remember from previous slide, was an endorsed candidate of ours. She introduced them at the end of the last cycle. It's around dealing with how we address lingering issues with waste from oil and gas operations. And her one bill, which she's already reintroduced and is out as a co-sponsorship memorandum. So she's just seeking support from her colleagues at this moment. It doesn't officially have a bill number yet. Would close the leachate loophole in our state law that permits unregulated, undertreated industrial waste from ending up in our drinking water. Her other bill would close the Solid Waste Management Act loophole, allowing oil and gas companies to skip hazardous waste testing for leachate and tracking and disposal rules. So those are positive bills that are going to be out there. Are they going to gain traction given the makeup of the legislature, given who I mentioned was just in control of the House Environmental Resource and Energy Committee? Maybe not, but we shouldn't write it off so early in the cycle. One thing we're almost assuredly going to see again is a piece of legislation that attempts to roll back protections for conventional oil and gas operations back to standards under the Oil and Gas Act of 1984. Conventional oil and gas operations are the more shallow drilling that occurs. Many of these operations using fracking techniques now to access that gas. Unconventional is the Marcellus Shale deep stuff. This passed both chambers last cycle. It was only because of the governor's veto that it didn't become into law. No reason to not think it's not going to come up again this cycle, and they were going to have to play defense and push back on it. I think some of the more egregious things that happens through this are it would allow operators to temporarily store hazardous material and chemicals in floodplain areas. Perhaps most egregious in certain circumstances, it would allow operators who contaminate drinking water supplies to not have to restore those drinking water supplies back to Safe Drinking Water Act standards. And it also lowers the threshold for spills on site before you would have to report that level of contamination. DEP is working on drafting conventional oil and gas regulations. So sort of the opposite of what the previous bill that I mentioned is doing, where they're actually looking to strengthen and improve what's currently on the books for conventional oil and gas regulations. If you've been in this fight for a while, a couple of years ago, there was an attempt to move both regulations that would improve protections from conventional operations and unconventional operations. And in the backroom haggling that occurred, the agreement was made, we'll move the stuff for the Marcellus Shale drillers and the deep well drilling, but we're not going to, in exchange, we're not going to do anything for the conventional operators. And so now that we're 4 years, I think, 5 probably now, from when that happened, DEP is revisiting trying to strengthen them. They've already put something out to one of their subcommittees, the Oil and Gas Technical Advisory Committee, which is what OGTAC is, just to sort of get their temperature on it. But they haven't developed a specific timeline for moving it forward. Another positive thing that I'm willing to guarantee is going to happen this year is we are going to see, probably sometime by late summer, new regulations on the book to control methane emissions from existing oil and gas operations. Such a big deal considering how potent methane is as a greenhouse gas, 86 times more potent in the short term than carbon dioxide. Going to be a big victory for us to get this under control, especially considering how much oil and gas operations we have in Pennsylvania, second or third largest in the nation. So as you can imagine, based off of that, we are contributing mightily to methane emissions, not just here in the United States, but methane emissions around the world. And if we're going to tackle climate change, which we really need to, getting this under control and doing something that we can do right here in Pennsylvania is going to be big. There was a public comment period that happened over the summer. We're anticipating that DEP is going to come out of that and produce their comment response document, which acknowledges all the comments that were made during the public comment process. So we're thinking maybe in February, we're going to get a sneak preview of what the final regulations are going to look like, with the formal regulations probably being introduced at DEP's Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee meeting in April, and that'll start the final regulation process for us. Switching issues to lead, one that we've been working on for quite some time is getting legislation passed to require all children to have their blood levels tested at ages 1 and 2. What we know is that this is a good route of going to help identify where children are being impacted so that we can develop a more thorough plan for how we can prevent lead exposure to kids. In Pennsylvania, we have the third in the country for homes built before the 1950s. So there's still a lot of people who are potentially being exposed to lead paint. We certainly have aging infrastructure all across our cities in Pennsylvania, and that opens us up for lead contamination of drinking water. As Maurice can attest to, in the Philadelphia area too, you have a lot of old industrial sites, and really in Pittsburgh as well, where you could be finding lead in soil. So children are being exposed, no doubt, to lead throughout Pennsylvania, but problem is we just don't know the extent of it. The last numbers out of our State Department of Health showed that somewhere less than 40% of children across Pennsylvania are being tested for lead between the ages of 1 and 2. And that number is really minuscule considering the potential pathways for exposure. We think this is a great way of doing this. Representative Mary Isaacson has been our champion on this out of the Philadelphia area. It also builds almost identically off of efforts that Clean Water Action has been heavily involved in Allegheny County and Philadelphia County to get something passed at the county level, knowing that those are potential hotspots. Dealing with lead in our infrastructure, we need to restore and expand PennVest funds for lead replacement projects. That really took a hit here in late fall, early winter, as the legislature was putting together a second half of the year budget to try to factor in for how revenue might have been impacted by COVID-19, and part of the way they were filling in some of the stop gaps was to raid the PennVest fund. We also want to improve transparency of lead service line locations by working with the state to require authorities to actually do an inventory and make that inventory easily accessible. There is a lot of authorities across Pennsylvania who just don't know where their lead service lines are that still exist. They haven't done an inventory in ages, and the inventory that they do have in the book is really old and not accurate. So getting them to do that is really the first step in figuring out how much we need to have in PennVest in order to help support replacement of lead service lines. PFAS are per and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals. These are chemicals that probably are most common in non-stick products like Teflon or raincoats, a lot of the plastic wrapping that fast food comes in contains it. In Pennsylvania, probably the biggest source for it has been in firefighting foam, especially firefighting foam that's being used at naval bases, airports, industrial sites. This is sort of the root cause of the contamination that's happened in the Bucks-Montco area, came from naval bases and the use of firefighting foam. But what people don't realize is DEP's identified 20 some other spots across Pennsylvania that have PFAS-related contamination to them. For those of you who might be joining over from Western PA, around our 9/11th Air Wing in the southern suburbs of Allegheny County, certainly Pittsburgh International Airport are both potential sites for PFAS contamination. The only thing is, in these areas, unlike in eastern Pennsylvania, you're not seeing yet contamination of drinking water. So we really want to try to address these issues. This issue, something that's moving already, is establishing a state maximum contamination level for PFAS in drinking water that is protective of human health. This is something the state's moving on. They're at the very early stages of it. It's something that is not exclusive to Pennsylvania. A lot of our neighboring states, in the absence of federal action over the past several years, have already moved to set really low standards for PFAS. The federal recommendation is 70 parts per trillion, and we're seeing neighboring states, New York, New Jersey, setting stuff that's 10 or less. Also want to pursue legislation that prohibits the use of firefighting foam that contains PFAS, knowing that that's such a major source here in Pennsylvania for that. In terms of climate change, there's probably a bunch of things you could list under this, but joining the regional governor, Wolf has identified this as a route he wants to take. It's about joining 10 other states in our region. We're really the only one in the Northeast who is not part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, placing a cap on CO2 from electric power plants, which in Pennsylvania is the second biggest source for greenhouse gases. This has some very big promise to it. The numbers we've seen suggest that the 10 other states that are in the initiative right now have experienced reductions of carbon pollution near 50% since 2005. So it's a big opportunity to reduce carbon pollution in Pennsylvania. Probably sort of the catch-22 that needs to be watched out for and factored in is, as you're developing a system where you can trade allowances, oftentimes you see industries that operate in environmental justice communities being the ones who are purchasing these allowances, which is only perpetuating their operation and their pollution of environmental justice areas. So something we need to balance out, as we have also potentially a good mechanism for addressing carbon pollution. Another defense is going to be around another water issue. Last cycle, we saw a bill that would attempt to weaken the Clean Streams Law by changing the definition of pollution in Pennsylvania, something we certainly anticipate coming back up again. Specifically, this bill in changing the definition, the way we categorize our streams is based off of our waterways really is based off of their use. And so like you would categorize it as a stream for fishing or recreation or drinking water. And as such, you would be dealing with pollution in a way that how does it impact that particular designated use? What the legislature wants to do is just assign it a numeric value. So if a stream is designated for fishing and pollution enters it and it kills fish but doesn't hit the numeric value to it, then it wouldn't be considered pollution that an industry would be held accountable for, because again, you're dealing with a numeric value as opposed to how you designate it. Single-use plastic bags, something Maurice and our crew in Philly have been working on for a while, is to ban or assess a fee on the use of single-use plastic bags in order to reduce their proliferation in society. What we've seen is the state legislature and Republican members of the state legislature have really taken exception to this over the past couple of years. It started with trying to get a standalone bill passed that would prohibit municipalities from enacting a ban, tax, or fee on plastic bags. Once that failed, now as part of the budget process, they keep sticking in provisions to continually delay municipalities' ability to enact legislation around that. They've done it in the last 2 budget cycles. So keeping an eye on that and really standing up for municipal rights and the ability of municipalities to control when the state doesn't, how they address pollution is something we're really keeping an eye on this cycle. Regulatory rollback initiatives, there is just a bunch of them. They've already started to come out. I won't necessarily touch on all these points given our time in the evening. Again, I'll share the slides with everybody and you can take a closer look. But essentially, there's stuff that's come up the past couple of sessions, and they're all designed to undercut DEP's ability to develop and implement needed protections. Whether that's if you pass 2 new regulations, you got to get rid of one, or actually establishing an independent office of the repealer, which sounds exactly like what it is, designed to seek and repeal legislation that's already on the books that they don't think is adequate anymore. It's an assault on the way we commonly address environmental protections in Pennsylvania if you're not going the legislative route. Perhaps the most timely part of this dives a little bit out of the environmental realm, but there's clearly attacks on our democracy in the form of how we go about electing our elected officials. Certainly it is a response that is happening from the presidential election cycle. The one that is most currently on the move is House Bill 38, which would change the way we elect our state appellate justices. Currently, Commonwealth, Superior, state Supreme Courts are elected statewide. They want to make it into having these state justices run in specific districts, which would really change the makeup of our judicial branches pretty drastically. It would also make it so that our justices, while ruling on issues that impact us all, they're not necessarily beholden to all Pennsylvanians. They're only beholden to those within their particular district. This was voted out of the State House Judiciary Committee. I think we're probably looking at it making its way through for a full vote before the House probably sometime next week before moving on to the Senate. And then in order for them to do this, this is not a piece of legislation the governor can veto, because it's going to be a amendment to the state constitution, which requires a referendum. So if it passes both chambers, which we suspect it will, again, given the makeup, we're going to see this on the ballot for voting, likely at some point either in this primary or this general election. We'll be putting more information out about how you can weigh in with your legislators next week as this becomes a bigger issue. There are also other issues related to changing the way we vote in Pennsylvania, eliminating vote by mail altogether, setting stricter deadlines for when vote by mail can be received, eliminating access to how you can drop off your mail-in ballot. They're all things that have legs and interest within the Republican Party to change what was so effective about how we voted in the last cycle. On the flip side of things, there's also bills out there that are trying to expand and codify what's happening around our elections, making flexible deadlines for vote by mail, allowing for early voting, actually making Election Day a holiday so that people have off and can participate in our democratic process. Moving on to DC, this is sort of a moving target to me, given the makeup of our federal government. I think there's a wide variety of things that could happen, and I myself am struggling to keep track of all the things that are being thrown out there and what's got early movement, what doesn't. But really, I think anything that is happening in DC starts obviously with the president and who the new president is, but also the team he's assembled to deal with environmental issues. A potentially outstanding team here. I won't go through all the names, but point out, as I'm sure all you're aware, that for the first time really making climate change and positions within the administration dedicated to that a focal point, in naming former EPA Director Gina McCarthy to head a domestic climate policy, and appointing former Secretary of State and Senator John Kerry to be an international climate envoy, I think shows the level of attention this administration is giving to the issue. As it relates to oil and gas, I mean, you can see the checks already. I mean, not 24, a little over 24 hours. We've already canceled the Keystone XL pipeline project, placed a temporary moratorium on oil and gas leasing in the Arctic. There's already efforts underway to direct agencies to consider revising new source methane emissions that the Trump administration was rolling back, directing EPA to take it even a step further and propose companion pieces of regulation for existing sources of methane, directing agencies to review allowing liquefied natural gas to move on rail cars without special permits or conditions. Switching over to climate, again, sort of a very broad area that could cover a lot of things. We already got a victory re-entering the Paris Climate Accord. I gotta tell you, I'm not used to winning stuff so quickly, especially within a 36-hour time span. Being able to say we got 3 victories in our belt right off the bat really feels good to say out loud. But also dealing with climate, directing agencies to review and consider revising the gas mileage standards that the Trump administration weakened, directing the Security and Exchange Commission to require publicly traded companies to disclose climate risk, directing agencies to review and consider revising appliance and building efficiency standards. I mean, there's obviously a massive climate proposal around reducing greenhouse gases and carbon pollution that the president has. I don't know what pieces of that could move, couldn't move. Is he going to try to do through passing legislation, considering the makeup considering the makeup of Congress. Are there going to be more action, executive actions? There's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could happen now, which is really exciting at the federal level, given what we've had to deal with for the past 4 years. With PFAS, we had a bill last cycle that passed the House, but didn't pass or didn't even get taken up in the Senate, which obviously now changes the dynamics given the makeup. The PFAS action bill to designate PFAS chemicals as hazardous substance under the Comprehensive Response Compensation and Liability Act. This is important so that EPA can force parties that it deems to be polluters to either clean up the polluted site or reimburse EPA for going out there and doing it. On water-related issues, President Biden he's already directing agencies to review and consider repealing the dirty water rule, which rolled back the waters of the U.S. rule, which really clarified designations for protections for waterways, as I sort of classified as miscellaneous. But not certainly unimportant, removing restrictions on science used to create new air and water protections, and requiring climate change calculus as part of any agency's cost-benefit analysis. I again say there's probably a ton of stuff I missed, given the possibilities that are out there now. Just trying to give you a snippet. I will say I did notice today the Washington Post seems like they're attempting to do a environmental tracker for folks. So if you haven't checked it out, you might want to do that as a means of trying to keep up on all the activity that I think is going to be happening around climate change and the environment over this next cycle. So that's my last slide. I again thank all of you for taking time out of your night to be a part of this, to want to understand where we might be going. I think there's certainly opportunities to make progress. No doubt we're going to need to band together and also play defense. But as I said before, regardless of the dynamics, it's about holding our elected officials accountable to the policies that they supported, that we elected them for. It's also about holding them accountable when they're trying to take a direction that's not, and that requires all of us to continue to work together and organize together in order to create the necessary power in order to make that happen.